Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 17th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about Alaska's special election, the congressional district at large, in which Representative Don Young unfortunately passed away, who had served in the state of Alaska for 49 years straight, died in office, and thus a special election was prompted to replace him for this upcoming November. Now, there are two elections. Yes, this is coinciding, or technically speaking, some elections overlap between the primary for November and the special election that is occurring right now, but what we will see is that essentially whoever wins this election will be serving until the November winner is sworn into office in January of 2023. So they're serving out the remainder of Representative Don Young's term, and it's not going to be super long, but the term itself was one that many people expected to go to the GOP simply because Republicans held it prior to. The state of Alaska really doesn't have a competitive history, especially when it came down to Representative Don Young. In fact, when you take a look at the map, it has been read the entirety of the tracking of this individual state. But guess what? The same representative had been in this state every single time. You go to 2010, Representative Don Young. You go to 2002, Don Young. You go to 1994, Don Young. You go to 1986, Don Young. And you go to the oldest one on this possibility, 1976, Representative Don Young. Now, in recent years, it has gotten more competitive. He started out with a 42-point margin of victory. 2010, he won by 40. Then 2012, he wins by 35. 2014, he wins by 10. 2016, he wins by 14. 2018, he wins by 7. And then in 2020, he wins by 9. Donald Trump, on the other hand, won Alaska by a larger margin than Don Young did, despite Don Young being in office for 49 years. So now that he has passed away, there is a vacancy that has occurred in which you have now seen the return of the former governor, Sarah Palin. Now, Sarah Palin is a very well-known Republican, largely because she was John McCain's vice presidential contender back in 2008. 14 years ago, she was on the top ticket for the presidency of the United States. Now, Sarah Palin was long seen as a very good person to have within the Republican Party. People saw her as this inspirational type of hockey mom candidate. That was what she gave off to the voters, at least when she first decided to run back in 2008. Now, her being associated with John McCain, she did end up losing, and largely, in many people's eyes, sunk John McCain's campaign. Not to say that Barack Obama likely wouldn't have won either way, but there definitely was a downside of having Sarah Palin as the vice presidential pick. And with her as the vice presidential pick, there were many Republicans that thought she might be a contender for 2012. But after the abysmal showing in 2008, it was just simply not in the playing cards. Sarah Palin didn't pursue any future office following that campaign until Representative Don Young's seat was vacated. After 49 years, the seat was finally up for grabs for whoever decided to run for it, and Sarah Palin decided to throw her hat in the ring. Now, the special election occurred last evening technically, but there have been many mail-in and absentee votes that we are still going to be waiting on counting for literally weeks leading into the next time it's going to see any type of ballot counter for the state of Alaska. But last night's election was a very interesting showing, not only for the Republicans, but also for the Democrats. And I say that because there was already a primary that occurred a month ago, in which voters were able to decide on the top 4 candidates that would head into the general election to face off against each other last evening. And in that election, you found that 3 Republicans advanced and 1 Democrat advanced as well. Well, by the end of it, 1 Republican decided to drop out, and thus it was between 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans. Now, that might be thinking about you might be thinking about the fact that there are 2 Republicans here, there's a Democrat, and you're thinking, okay, doesn't this mean the Democrat automatically wins? This is automatically a pickup because the Democrat is ahead, and that's not how it is. Alaska has ranked choice voting, which means the last Republican here, Nick Begich, if he does end up heading into the runoff without the second place position, his votes are split, meaning that they are going to go and be split between Mary Peltola and Sarah Palin. That's how ranked choice voting works. So whoever those voters decided as their second choice will get those remaining votes, and thus one of these candidates will be elevated to a position of victory. Now, the results are actually, surprisingly good news for the Democratic Party and surprisingly bad news for the GOP. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the Republican Party still comes out ahead in the Alaska special election that we're seeing right here. But to the extent that the Democrat is doing well, with considering the fact that most of this vote, in fact, about 96% of it is election day vote. In fact, maybe 100%. I'm not entirely sure. I know it's somewhere in the high 90s in terms of what we have counted thus far. I believe they just counted military ballots, but we haven't headed into the ranked choice voting yet. What we are seeing here is that the majority of the votes that have been counted thus far, overwhelming at that, are election day voters. And if we learned anything from the 2020 election, it's that election day voters backed the GOP to a higher extent. And based off of party breakdown, that actually makes a bit of sense. Nick Begich getting about 30% of the vote to Sarah Palin's 30% means Republicans are ahead by at least 60, or at least with 60% of the vote. Mary Peltola is at 38%. About a 62 to 38 advantage for the GOP, plus write-ins, I guess, including that with the GOP or not. About a 60 to 38 advantage for the Republican Party based off election day votes altogether. But honestly speaking, that's a good sign. And it's a good sign because of the candidate Nick Begich, who has largely proclaimed himself as the more moderate, more, I guess, middle of the ground type Republican versus Sarah Palin, who has wholeheartedly endorsed President Trump. The Democratic Party is in a good position because the numbers with a Palin victory in the second place spot put Mary Peltola in a much better position than if she was to face against Nick Begich. Practically every single poll that puts up Begich versus Peltola shows Begich in the victory lap. But you show Palin against Peltola, and Peltola, the Democrat, ends up winning. Alaska is by no means a swing or competitive state. In the last presidential election, Donald Trump won it by 10 points statewide. Especially considering where we are on the national level, it just simply doesn't make sense that a Democrat would be this far advanced in the race itself. But the victory won't be because the Democrat is this awe-inspirational, extremely strong Democrat, but rather because Sarah Palin pushes away more Republicans than she gains through the splitting of Nick Begich's votes. All Mary Peltola needs is about 12% of the vote. Sarah Palin, on the other hand, needs nearly 20%. It'll be easier for Palin, don't get me wrong, because she is a Republican. It's asking Republican voters to vote for another Republican. But Sarah Palin also has a reputation, one that I think will extend beyond simple partisanship, enough so that Mary Peltola might end up winning this race. There's a reason why the ballots and the polls in the state of Alaska tell us that in a specific one-on-one matchup, the Democrat would win. There's one common denominator there, and that's the nomination of Sarah Palin to the second place spot. And considering where the remaining votes are coming from in this state, it looks very well that Nick Begich just simply doesn't have enough votes to overcome Sarah Palin by the end of this map. About 30%, according to the New York Times, of the vote is still out, but most of these states and bigger Republican areas have already been counted. The election day vote has been counted as well. That is the most Trumpy of the vote. But also looking at the absentee ballots, the question is, are the numbers there? And it doesn't look like they are. The question will now remain, who ends up winning the race, Mary Peltola or Sarah Palin? My money right now, I would say Sarah Palin, but I'd also be apprehensive. But the problem is we won't know for at least 2 weeks. The state of Alaska has laws that prohibit the counting of the absentee ballots for days. They also have to accept the absentee ballots for 2 weeks after a certain point because that's when the deadline was extended or what was already established. You know, there are different things that determine when the absentee ballots can be submitted, can be counted, but at the end of the day, it prolongs the Alaska special election. And as a result, we simply, as of right now, don't know who's going to win, because they can't start ranked choice voting until they see who's heading off into the final two. And when you have a race as close between Sarah Palin and Nick Begich, it comes to a point where you can't make that distinction. And even if you could, you still need to wait, because all of these second place votes need to be allocated, not just a few. So Mary Peltola at this point, I would say, should be a lot more confident than she was yesterday. Taking a look at the predicted betting market odds, she is currently at 23 cents for a yes share. That's up from where she was yesterday at just 16 cents. It's not super significant, but it's definitely an increase, and it's the highest point it has ever been on the predicted market. Nick Begich, on the other hand, who finished yesterday with 30 cents for a yes share, has now dropped to 2. Dropped to 2 for a reason, because voters don't think he's going to win. I would also say the Democratic Party gets a good result because Sarah Palin would be much easier to beat in the future than someone like Nick Begich. Begich is a very well-known Democratic name across the state, and while he is no Democrat, he is someone who has name recognition and someone that voters at least trust more than Sarah Palin. I truly think if Palin was to win this special election, it makes Republicans more vulnerable in the future, because guaranteed she will say something and she will screw up, as she did in 2008. I'm excited to see what the results are in this Alaska special election, even though we will likely have to wait until the early months of September. I'm excited to see because I want to know how it fares against the predictions from the major mainstream outlets on this race. The Cook Political Report said likely Republican. Inside Elections said likely Republican. Larry Sabato's crystal ball said safe Republican. Well, where have I seen this before? In Nebraska's 1st congressional district, in this special election in which the Republican won by about 5 points district-wide. The predictions, solid R all across. Cook, Sabato's, Politico, Real Clear Politics, same thing in the state of Minnesota. You take a look at the predictions here, likely Republican, solid. At the end of the day, the predictions aren't always accurate, and I'm interested to see how much Democrats actually outperform what is expected of some of these districts. Because Nebraska was supposedly a fluke. Kansas, abortion referendum was supposedly a fluke. Minnesota was supposedly a fluke. And if it comes to a point where there's no longer the possibility that it's supposedly a fluke 5-6 times, we have to start reevaluating what we think about these upcoming midterm elections. Because as of today, the generic ballot is now a 1-point lead for Democrats if you're rounding upwards, but it's also a lead for the first time on Real Clear Politics. For the first time, again, in 9 consecutive months, Democrats have overcome Republicans in the generic ballot, and that is being reflected on nationwide negatively for the GOP. This Alaska special election, with so many election day votes going for the Democrat, I will say that Democrats should be a lot more happy with what they see in this result. Sarah Palin very well could end up winning it, but right now she seems to have knocked out Nick Begich, who probably won't make a return bid. Mary Peltola is a strong Democrat, but this isn't her year for victory. And if she does, then we will have to have some severe and serious reevaluations of what we expect in the 2022 midterms. Reevaluations of what we expect on the Senate, House, governor map. If the Democrats are to win in the state of Alaska, it would mean a lot better news for Democrats than what they are currently getting. The House forecast is grim. It says that Democrats aren't going to win Alaska in the regular election. It also says the Democrats aren't going to win Alaska, or at least the House, on the nationwide level. Republicans have about a 78% chance at victory there. In the Senate, I would say it's a bit different. Democrats in the Senate have a higher chance at victory, 63%. When you take a look at the classic and light model, that jumps up to 75, and then you have 79. So Democrats definitely should be a lot more optimistic and happy about the Senate. But the House is still very much out of reach. And knowing that and knowing the Alaska results, that could very well change. If Democrats are able to flip a congressional district in what is expected to be a red wave year, well, maybe it just simply isn't a red wave. We've seen it in Kansas. We've seen it in Nebraska. We've seen it in Minnesota. There's a special election coming up in New York. And if every special election post-Dobbs ends up with bad news for the GOP, or at least a narrowing up from the presidential level, or from some cases, in this one where you have a ranked choice voting scenario where no Democrat should have even made it this far, if that happens, well, the Democratic Party has something to run on. They have energy, they have enthusiasm, and they have stuff to show for it. They have these moral victories, potentially an actual victory in the state of Alaska, a victory on the ballot in the referendum in the state of Kansas. And what does that mean? It means they are doing something correct, and Republicans simply aren't. That's what is at stake here. That is where the problem lies, and that's why the GOP at this point in time should keep closely watching these races, because they are warning signs. They were warning signs that we could have seen back in 2017 and 2018, except this isn't 2018. But maybe it is. Maybe it's getting more favorable for the Democratic Party as the days go on, and so far, no data to dispute that. If Republicans really were pulling ahead so easily and so quickly within this race, Nick Begich and Sarah Palin would be the top two right now. But they aren't. They aren't because voters here want somebody else, especially with Sarah Palin on the ballot. Sarah Palin, I still think, could very well pull this off. Right now, she's the favorite according to the betting markets, and just realistically speaking, Alaska isn't a state that anyone would really expect to go towards the Democrats. But that's also why it would be so substantial if it actually did. Mary Peltola doesn't really have much riding on her back, but now that she's close to a possible chance at victory, many Democrats are looking at her as this sleeper opportunity that people really didn't think the Democrats were going to be able to win. Maybe in Minnesota, maybe in this upcoming New York special election, but beyond that, never really considered it. Alaska was, in most cases, an afterthought in special elections. But now, it's front and center, because the Democratic Party has a revitalized chance at winning this race, all because of two Republicans running against each other with two very different ideologies, attacking each other, and a very unpopular but well-known Republican governor running on the Republican side. It will be fascinating to see the result, but the problem is we won't get these absentee ballots counted for about 2 to 3 weeks, so it's going to be a waiting game until about early September when we will get a better idea of who's ahead and who's winning. I can tell you right now, if Democrats win this seat, a lot is going to change, and our expectations are going to shift pretty dramatically for both parties. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.